moving on to the next assignment, definitely switching gears and not really focusing so much on the communication. But now's your chance to definitely be a little bit more creative and test this system, to say the least. However, I've updated the Miro. I think I'm just going to post them on here. It's a little easier. I'll eventually put them on Canvas, but you really should be kind of getting used to the Miro board as well. It's really great to actually, even talk among friends, like, hey, can you look at my work? What do you think? And quite easy to mark it up as well. However, let's just get right into it. Not a whole lot to say. This next exercise will begin our first project for the course. So it's kind of our first, at least the beginning of our first project. Eventually we'll turn this into something. I won't tell you yet because I don't want that to influence your design just quite yet. We will begin with a simple abstract diagram, right, to start to understand the iteration ability of the software and how it can be applied to Studio. The final will become a part of a project worthy for portfolio with process and product, so be sure to save your work constantly. I wouldn't recommend doing an entire project in Rhino, right? In fact, I would do it in kind of pieces, but I'll let that be kind of the lesson to learn on the way. What I'm looking for is eventually 3 11x17s. Yes, that's 3 separate prints, basically one plan view and one perspective view. So of course I'll explain what I mean by that. Essentially what we'll be doing, guys, is if you ever had me for Design 1 or remember your Design 1 class, essentially what we'll be doing is composing something out of lines, planes, and points, right? So very familiar. And creating a 3-dimensional model out of it. So, I mean, especially if you had me for D1, we're basically doing an entire 8-week project in about a week, right? Or a week and a day-ish. However, I wouldn't let that alarm you because obviously I'm not asking for the same amount of deliverable. Anyway, so let's get right into it. I'm gonna go into Rhinoceros and make a new file. My computer's going particularly slow. Let's prop it up a little bit. A cool computer is a happy computer. Maybe I didn't click on new model? No? Oh, slowly. That's what I get for screen recording. It does take up a lot of processing power. There we go. But yeah, if you ever find that your computer's going a little bit slow, I've mentioned before, you can definitely use Mac fan control, right? Especially if you're on Mac. We probably don't need Brave browser right now. And, well, I guess we could use Miro. But yeah, much better. Sweet. So first instruction, let's take a look at it. What does it say to do? Basically, we're making a composition. So this one shouldn't be too long of a tutorial, but I'm essentially just going to make the one right here and kind of just show a couple of tools and tricks. Because one thing I would suggest about this, guys, how many of you guys have drawn something before, right, in freehand or graphics? A lot of us, right? So what's really nice about this process, I don't have to draw something quite literally in Rhino. I could trace what my drawing is that I did analog. Does that make sense, guys? So I can actually freehand something, and I really would recommend for this project to draw it outside of the computer first. It's actually really good practice to continue your drawing ability. Don't lose that, right? Because anybody can trace something in Rhino, but not everybody can draw something, as you guys know from your Freehand 1 and Freehand 2 courses. So it's better to actually draw it first, always, and then have that little sketch right next to you so you can either copy it or scan it and trace it, right? So let's talk about that a little bit. So first rule, it says create a 30 by 30 square frame to compose the 2D operation. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna go ahead and make a rectangle. Type in 30 feet by 30 feet. Awesome. So I do have my composition. It's pretty huge. Honestly, it's fine. right? Second thing to do, it says create a 5x5 grid system that references as center points. So what I mean by that is basically create a grid for yourself that we can either turn this into a three-dimensional grid of some sort. It doesn't necessarily have to be, what's the word, orthogonal, right? It doesn't have to be a perfect 5x5 in which, you know, these are all 6x6. But let's say I did want to do that. So I want perfect dimensions for my 5 spacings. So I'm going to explode my lines. And I'm going to divide one of these lines. So I can take that one, I can hit divide. And then it says how many times do you want to divide it into. And in my case, I can make it, since I want 5 lines in there, I can make it 6 parts. You'll see the little points come up, right? And now I could use those to lock onto. So I can even copy the existing line I already had. I can make sure that point is activated. So you'll notice if I hit point, right, it'll actually lock onto that point a little bit easier. And very useful tool. Right? We've got that side. I could do that just all over again, or I could mirror it using my diagonal relationship. So the more you understand about geometry, honestly, the easier it is to do things. However, I did say it had to be a 5x5, so it looks like I accidentally got a 6. It's alright. Again, very easy fix. I don't mind making mistakes, right? You know, because it actually teaches us. So I'm going to go ahead and divide. It used to be that way though, where it actually counted the opposite and the other, but easy fix. Copy again. Let's make sure it's 5x5. And like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be orthogonal, right? So maybe I want to switch it up a little bit, right? If you guys remember my D1 project, I have you guys use the golden ratio, right? Let's take those and apply the same. So I'm going to go ahead and mirror it using my diagonals. Awesome. So step 1, step 2, check. Here's probably the most specific one. Using only 12 lines, 6 orthogonal planes, 3 curved lines, and 3 points, compose your abstract diagram. Now, I would say I'm not going to sit here and count every single little piece, right? However, get within range. I did mention how we were sort of picking up into this abstraction step. And of course, right next to us in the hallway is like an extreme version of abstraction. Keep in mind, that is not our project. That is not what I'm looking for. But, you know, methodology-wise, that's kind of what we're going on the same line. So 12 lines, 6 orthogonal planes. Let's say this was actually my drawing. Now, you know, it does have 6 lines, right, ish, maybe 7, 8, you know, it depends what you call a line. It definitely has 3 curves involved. You know, I can almost argue that those are planes, so I'm going to go with this, right? You know, just to kind of show that we can trace something. Let's say that I did draw it analog on a drafting table, and, you know, I do want to take it into Rhino. So the thing that I could do is actually type in picture, and of course you can put any picture, of course in the right file format. I have no idea why my computer is struggling so hard. Could be the screen share. It's probably the internet. But definitely doesn't take that long to load a photo for me. Anyway, we'll place our photo to the best of our ability. Keep in mind that we're eventually going to do 3 of these, and more than likely, hint hint, I'm going to have you pick one and run with it. So what I would say is, you know, don't sell yourself short, kind of thing. I also don't want to do this all over again, over and over. So I'm going to go ahead and make 3 copies now. That way, at least I have the grid portion and that 30 by 30. And I essentially need to make 3 plan views, right, and 3 digital models, right? So we'll definitely at least talk about 1 for this tutorial. So first things first, I can take in that image and I can trace it. There's a lot of different things I could do, such as circle, right? I could find, you know, I'm just going to fake it till I make it and guess. Awesome. Get pretty close. And of course I can move it. right? Get pretty darn close. That looks pretty cool. Can take that. Take this rectangle. That seems about right. So essentially just redrawing, those elements. Rotate it. Right, I can take that piece, take it over there, make sure that it's relatively close. Boop. There we go. I don't want to do that angle again, so I'll just take that one. That way I know that they're congruent. I can always shrink it, right, with my gumball tool. I can hold shift, get that just right. Copy again. And again, I'm just kind of going for, tutorial mode. Use a polyline. I'm not sure if we've gone over polylines and all the different drawing tools yet. But essentially just getting my drawing. I want to cross those so I can trim it later. Another thing that I could do, because I can't really see what I'm tracing at the moment, so I can click on that image as well, and if I hit on this paint tube or the properties or material properties, it takes a little while to load, unfortunately. But of course we can set a transparency to our images as well. Gosh, this is just awful in terms of how slow is everything going. Better. Let's check my fan real quick. Most computers, you don't want to run your chips over 165 degrees Fahrenheit, right? So anytime that your computer's just going kind of abnormally slow, it's not a bad idea to actually check what's going on. Check your temperatures, things like that. Don't really mean to record this, but yeah, I'm getting pretty close, right? 156 at my CPU core. And maybe I haven't explained this before, but those are kinds of the numbers you're looking at, right? If you see it going at like 195, that's really bad, right? Your chips can melt. In fact, the hotter that they get can actually shorten their life, right? So again, I'm not saying like put it in the freezer or anything and like work in an air conditioned area, but they definitely, they're affected by temperature greatly. Another tip and trick that I would give anybody is that you should always turn off your laptop at the end of the day, right? Never just kind of leave it running for weeks on end. That's another way to lose all that money that you spend on these devices. Looks like we're going down a little bit. Actually, it looks like it's getting hotter as I talk, but anyway, definitely want to double check and at least give that information. So let's trace some other things. Eventually I'm going to extrude these and make something out of them. So I do want to set myself up for that. So for instance, I don't always have to make a circle. I can make a arc, right? Arc based off of the center. So it's going to ask me for the center of that. I'm just going to kind of guess. I'm going to say the other side's there. Man, that's a good guess. Anyway, I surprise even myself sometimes. Let's get some rectangles in there. Copy that guy. Oh, and like I said, yeah, we can get some transparency in here. So we can click on that. There's a transparency tab. We control the object transparency. And of course, see our objects a little bit better. I can always just change my layer to something I could see better as well. Let's go with orange today. We haven't used orange yet. Actually, it's kind of hard to see. Green? Green's easy to see. At least for me to see. Seems okay on the projector too. But I mean, we can get really specific. Like I said, I'm looking for creativity. If you notice in the rubric, it is 25%, a little bit more than, honestly, our other assignments. I definitely want to see what you are trying to accomplish in here. However, I can't go over every single command, but I definitely want to get into a few, right? So definitely tracing, just because, maybe some of us haven't traced before. Obviously, I'm just typing in line and polyline. and setting myself up for basically turning these into three-dimensional objects. So I'm hitting spacebar, just drawing lines, spacebar again. I can also lock my image, just in case it's getting, you're accidentally moving it. So, of course we can lock it. Draw another line. Not lock, line. There we go. And let's get that half circle in there. That looks pretty cool. Might as well finish. However, there's different ways to make all of these shapes as well. So I'd really test out some of these things, right? I mean, there's, arc, start, end, radius. And the reason I need that is because I need a start, an end, and then make a radius. You guys see what I'm doing there? So there's definitely a lot of different ways to make, honestly, the exact same shape. Honestly, I know these over time. I've practiced so much that I just see start in arc, and I'm like, yeah. So that means it's going to ask me for a starting point, an end point, and then it's going to create the arc for me. So a lot of these commands, the answer is really in the command, right? I mean, for God's sakes, one of the commands is what, right? And you can literally find out what something is. So, I mean, it's clearly designed to be extremely intuitive, right? So I can't tell you how many times I just guess in the command bar and I was like, oh wow, that's actually a command, right? So you'd be surprised what your intuition can give you. Anyway, let's say I was done tracing this guy and we're ready to go. So I can move this guy out of the way, right? And maybe that's my end selection. For the sake of the floor plan, it would be a good idea to get that shade and shadow, right? Or not shade and shadow, but that poche level, right? So in my case, poche is not called poche in Rhino, but is of course called hatching. And I don't know if we've exactly gone over hatching yet, but we can hatch, enter, right? It's going to say self-intersecting input curves were found. Do you want to use boundary model? Heck yeah. In fact, you just always want to switch it to boundary anyway. The reason I say boundary is because it's more like a fill bucket tool now. So I can click on the inside of something and it's going to fill that in for me. It's not going to necessarily show the color yet or anything like that. But as you can imagine, it's more like a paint bucket, right? And we'll get that one too. Right? After I'm done, I'll hit enter. And it'll actually turn into something. So I can either leave it solid, I can do a lot of things here. We can make it a grid. Eventually this will be put into Illustrator and we can change that again. So it's not really super important. We just change the fill in Illustrator. But maybe we get that. I don't know if we'll get to that today in this tutorial. It's probably a part 2 on Tuesday. Anyway, we'll leave it solid for right now. Keep going. Right, because we'll say that is our composition. Now, maybe I should have left the assignment open. Let's get that assignment real quick. Seriously, I've never seen my computer go this slow. I'm worried. Anyway, sack. I teach too many classes. Too many times. Exercises. I'm getting there. I'm trying to be as organized as possible these days. Let's go ahead and open that up. Don't need my arc toolbar. There we go. Next step, right, we need to use those 12 lines and we need to extrude and cap and offset thickness, your lines, planes, and grid into a 30 by 30. It says by 50, but let's keep it 30 by 30 by 30. Right? Sorry for that error. You're welcome to scratch it out. Which reminds me, foolish me, I have a physics copy for you. Yeah. Mirror, but one goes there. I mean, I guess I could leave that up to you. You know, I've let my more advanced students, I've let them kind of go 30 by 30 by 50. I think that's why I originally did that. So, but I think as, you know, just standard, I don't want to confuse you. Like, wait, he just said 30 by 30 by 30. Why does it say 50 now? Just keep that in mind, right? Obviously, if you choose one of those sizes, just be consistent. But clearly with 30 by 30 by 50, you have more to, of course, work with. Anyway, we'll get there. So what I mean by that is we'll have 30 by 30. You can go up 30 feet or you can go up 50 feet. All right, so I'll let that be up to you. Does that make sense, guys? Okay. Just didn't want to confuse you. I definitely confused everybody last year with that, and I was like, oh man, I should have explained that a lot better. But anyway. So we got our piece. It does say I need to make a grid system, and it says, you know, so, you know, at least what I would do is probably make some sort of dowel, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and make a copy of all of this, right? Because I kind of want to leave this. I don't want to accidentally mess it up. And I'm basically just gonna call it like my modeling area, right? So I'm just gonna do my modeling with these pieces. And I can leave these alone, that way, you know, I can, you know, save it for later. I can make this fit. Maybe that's my composition. Yep, looks good to me, at least for the sake of this tutorial. Let's make it a little bit smaller. Let's fit it on there. Like I said, we're not really worried about scale. However, this would just be an object in the space, so maybe I gotta rotate a little bit, get it in there a little bit more. After all, it is a composition. If you're absolutely inspired by jazz or the trumpet, you're more than welcome to, you know, abstract something or, you know, whatever the flavor of the day or something like that is. Whatever inspires you, you know. Feel free to just be in those confinements of the line, plane, and point. Anyway, so actually, I just did all that work for that one, so why do that again when I can just copy it? And let's go ahead and talk about modeling. This is definitely where, you know, people can get tricked up because there's so many different things we can do. I'm gonna go ahead and get my grids. Now, I should probably make that a layer because as you can see, you know, I'm gonna have to select all these. But the first thing that I want to do is actually turn this into, say, my dowels, right? So I do need to make a grid, and just like Studio or just like a Studio model, I want to mimic reality. However, if I just do little lines, you're not going to really see those. I want to see three-dimensionality, right? I want to turn those lines into something else. However, I don't want to sit there all day making each and every single one into something else. So the first thing I want to show is pipe. So we can pipe something, and we can pipe a lot of things actually at one time. I can set a radius of, say, 3 inches, so that they're 6 inches in diameter. Enter, right? And voila, we have a grid system. I feel like half of you guys could probably use this in your studios alone already, right? It looks like my camera's a little bit wonky, so I'm going to select what I'm working on and hit my favorite button, which is the zoom selected, right? Or you can type in zoom selected, but it's going to readjust our camera to where that's on the center view, right? It's looking pretty good. However, I feel like I'm going to want multiple grids. After all, I am going three-dimensionally, so I do need to either go up 30 feet or 50 feet. So let's go ahead and do that first. And make sure I got all my poles. I'm going to move this. Now, I don't want to move anything in perspective view. You'll notice that I'll go to another view, and I'll make sure that I do it in elevation, right? Let's go up 30, or let's do 3 of them at 10 feet. After all, I'm just making an abstract model. Let's try that again, and copy, and 10 feet. So now we got 20 feet. We can do it again. Awesome. Starting to get a grid system, not too bad. I can also start to think about, say, the columns of that system. So I do have points where those grid lines intersect with each other, right? So what I could do is make myself a little box, right? However, I could get fancy with the spices too. I really like saying that. Fancy with the spices. Let's get that curve. Sometimes you're going to lose where you are, right? You're going to be like, oh, I'm way up here. Gotcha. I can extrude a curve. Probably my favorite tool, right? Because I can do that to any curve in this realm. But I'm going to set it down. Oh no, look, I'm going over it. The main reason why you shouldn't always work in just one viewport, right? Because sometimes things appear actually different than what they actually are. But let's get that piece. Let's complete my columns. I'm making architecture by the second, right? So I can go ahead and align those and just copy them. I can hit every single point that I pretty much interact with. However, it is an abstract model, so I don't necessarily have to do every single one. I'm not going to build it tomorrow or anything like that. So again, maybe I give it some character by not doing actually every single one. But let's get the main ones. Let's make it look at least realistic. But that definitely looks realistic enough to at least hold itself together. Like I said, we're not going to actually build these yet or anything like that, so don't like scare yourself away and make something super simple just because you're like, well, I don't know, Verette might make us make this, right? That definitely isn't the case. We actually just want to show off our three-dimensional modeling skills, right? So already off the get-go, I have my grid system, and it's looking pretty good, right? Things are connecting to each other, not necessarily everything. There's kind of a cantilever situation in some spots. But for more or less of a better term, you see something spatial, right? Almost a first floor, second floor, third floor situation, right? So don't get me wrong, we're still sticking to architecture. As much as we were kind of just making random objects for the last two assignments, I definitely want you to think about, what this could be, right? And at least how you could use it. Anyway, the part of the next step is making it three-dimensional. So let's take maybe some of these lines and let's extrude them. Like I said, let's get some arbitrariness. However, that's okay. I almost kind of see walls right now. Let's make those walls floating and maybe penetrated by the grid system itself. Pretty interesting. However, there's not really a lot of thickness to those planes, so we can definitely add thickness by doing offset surface. I think I went over that one before. In my case, let's make them thin walls, maybe 3 inches. Enter. Spacebar for enter again, and it's of course going to give that wall some thickness. Now, obviously, I'm not following my own directions. For instance, I should be being organized as much as possible, right? I'd want to actually label all my lines as a layer, all my grids as a layer, all those things as a layer, because eventually I'm going to put this in Illustrator, right? And as you can imagine, this would be an absolute chaotic mess eventually. However, I'm kind of the guy who likes to model really fast and then give them the layers assigned, so that's okay too. Just be sure to always be organized. Right? But we got some planes, right? And what I mean by that is, we can take these, right? I can right click on, say, layer 2 and change object layer. It's going to change color for us. So again, right? These don't necessarily all have to be the same. Like I said, I'm making an abstract model, so it'll be quite different. Play around with it. After all, I do need to make 3 of them. They don't necessarily all have to be the exact same or based on the same geometry. You're more than welcome to test some things out. What I would recommend is completing all 3 of your 2-dimensional floor plan first, then going into the 3D modeling and experimentation. Let's try something else. I do have the lofting ability. I do have extrude. Let's try extrude again. Keep that piece. I kind of like that as a kind of a bottom piece. It's got a weird thickness to it, so I'm gonna go offset surface again. Let's make it thick. I'm gonna go 12. Enter. Awesome. Maybe a rammed earth wall of some kind. As you can see, it didn't really get all of that, so I might need to, either work with that a little bit. Another thing that I didn't really address is, well, you could subtract from this as well, right? So for instance, maybe I'm finding that a little overbearing in terms of, sort of what's going on there. So I'm going to go ahead and wire cut some of it out, right? In fact, I'm going to use maybe a circle and wire cut some of that out. So I'll take this piece, let's find out where it is. Way off in space, there it is. So we'll take that guy and put him over here. And I'm going to go ahead and wire cut that. Looks like I need to reset my camera. Perfect. It's really great when you're trying to look for something. And let's make it a little bit smaller, a little bit higher. Wire cut. And cut that object. So I'm going to go straight through it. Because after all, I didn't say you couldn't. So take that piece. Nice. Is it still the same from the top? Absolutely. Okay. But at least now there's something a little bit more spatial. And of course we know how to do something like that. Like I said, this really isn't something yet. However, it is definitely architectural space now. We've got a grid system, we've got walls. And as you can imagine, it's kind of being set up to be something, right? Now don't worry, we're not gonna do a 20,000 square foot project or anything. In fact, we'll do something maybe a little bit more personable, but hopefully this gives you a good idea, right, where we're going with this. Maybe this is a platform, why not? So let's go ahead and extrude that. However, I don't know if it'll let you extrude a hatch, so I'm going to actually take that curve on the edge and extrude that. There are a couple of options. So for instance, you may notice that every time you extrude something, you're like, wait, it's always hollow. You can click on solid. As long as it's a very uniform shape and it's closed, you can make it solid. However, let's make a platform. Usually floors are about 12 inches, so let's go with 12 inches. You'll notice that I kind of stay in a 3, 6, 9, 12 sort of thickness of things, and that's fine too. I don't expect any of us to, again, build this tomorrow, right? Maybe I line that on there. Is it possible that I have multiple? Actually, yeah, right? Just because I see it in plan, who's to say I don't actually have 3 of these, 4 of these? Why not? See what I'm saying? So again, very, very abstract model, right? It doesn't necessarily have to work yet, right? We'll definitely get there. In fact, I really don't even mind if some things are kind of floating, if some things don't make sense yet, because those are actually going to be a nice little problem to have for our next assignment. But we do want to show off our skills. We do want to kind of interconnect things. What I would say is, like, not everything has to be separated, right? In fact, it's kind of really interesting that we're able to see the structure on the bottom piece, and it's sort of coming through this piece. And like I said, we can wire cut this all day too. So it's getting there. Let's get the rest of it though. This guy's looking good. Let's extrude him. Nope, let's spell extrude correctly. But yeah, as you can see, even though I have solid checked, and since this isn't a closed object, it isn't going to make a solid, right? It's still technically a plane or a surface. However, I can offset surface and give it thickness. In our case, let's go with 12 inches again. However, that's a pretty overbearing wall, to say the least. So I'm going to go ahead and chop it. I also don't want to get too much outside of my parameters. So let's go ahead and chop that off. So wire cut this guy. And let's slice it right off, right? We'll go this way because it's asking which one to get rid of. And delete. But again, starting to look pretty architectural, right? We got a grid. Can you imagine how long this would have took us if we just made a study model real quick, guys? Right? How inaccurate it would have been. I know all of you guys in Chronodal's class right now are like, son of a bee, right? This is exactly what I'm doing in Chronodal's, right? Anyway, we think very similar. Right? Did you have a question, Christopher? No. Oh. But yeah, definitely getting there. And like I said, just because it looks like this in plan, right? We can still chop away from the the Y and the X direction. So I'm gonna get fancy with the spices again, and I'm just gonna use this curve again. Maybe shrink it up or something. Like I said, it's an abstract model, right? I mean, really the only thing we've really added besides our other assignments is a little bit of scale now, right? 30 by 30 by 50. Let's wire cut that again. Let's get rid of that piece. Sweet. Why not? Probably a little dinky, but oh well. After all, it is just a tutorial. I do have some elements that are kind of outside of the box, so I mean, I could think about it. I do have a lot of artistic license here. Could just, you know, scoot it over for a second. Extrude it. You can also sweep some of these things. However, keep in mind we want to have a true floor plan, if you will. Does that make sense? Because one thing that we could do is, well, we could make 2D of this model, right, and get our floor plan. Could we not? Right? We don't necessarily have to keep, you know, sort of that original either. So let's test that out a little bit. I'm gonna go ahead and take this, make 2D. Of course, maintain source layers. It's kind of given. Takes a second. But yeah, obviously this will have to be a two-part series. But yeah, we don't necessarily have to keep that initial. And it even starts to get some of that nice overlap for us. It starts to even bulk up the grid for us. This could easily be our floor plan. However, I might need to, you know, take a closer look at it, right? Honestly, I'll let this be up to you guys. You can either take this into Illustrator, give it some line weight, call it a day, or you can take this guy. Again, you have to still give it some Illustrator work, but maybe not as much, right? Anyway, hopefully make 2D. That gives you two options to of course make that quote-unquote floor plan. I keep calling it a floor plan, but it's really just a floor plan view, right? It's not really a floor plan. After all, this is just sculpture. Big sculpture, 30 by 30 by 50 sculpture, but sculpture. Let's see, what else can I add, or did I get all of my pieces? Oh, there's maybe another one. Let's extrude that. Oh, got a bigger curve to extrude it. Well, that's weird. Oh, I got it. So I remember I made two curves. So one was a straight line, one was an arc. I can join those, so J for join. But keep in mind when you extrude something, you'll have to be very aware of, is it closed, is there a little gap? Another command that you can use to close something that you think you're not sure if it's open or not is called close curve. Right, definitely a great one to write down when you're panicking. Let's go with 12 inches again. That looks pretty sweet. You know what? I'm gonna go and try something else. Maybe I want like 20 of those, but I'm not gonna sit there and make 20 of them. I'm gonna go ahead and array them. Right. So if I type in array, I'll definitely want all my views for this one. I'm gonna say, well, I want one in the X direction. Enter. I want 20 in the, or no, I still want one in the Y direction, but I want 20 in the Z direction. Sweet. So it's going to ask me for a base point, and it's going to say, okay, what do you want to do with that? So obviously I chose the wrong direction. You guys see that? See how it's kind of going still on that X and Y axis. That's fine. Let's try it again. Array. Pretty sure that's still 1. I'm gonna go with Y direction 20 and Z direction 1. Let's try that again. There it is. So why not? Enter. Look how much easier that was. And they're all perfectly spaced. Honestly, not bad. Right. It almost kind of has that elevator core feel, maybe. Definitely going to produce some interesting shade and shadow. In fact, we can test it out. Nice. Look at that. I can take a screenshot here, Mr. Canodal, right? Yeah, probably not. And for good reason, right? Because you can make them in 30 minutes. Anyway. But at least for our class, and let's face it, you know, Kernodal and Bosov and all these other professors that we have, you're going to find more at UTSA. You're going to find more at Texas Tech. You're going to find all these different ways, and they might allow and want to see those renders. They don't want to see a full final model yet because they actually want to see a model. I had this one professor, he hated study models. He only liked final models. So we'd always make the model first in Rhino, and then we'd either 3D print those pieces, and we'd make a $500 final model, right? However, at SAC, we like this iteration process, so very often we're asking you to make study model, and they get a little bit better, and they get a little bit better, and it turns into like a final model. But it really kind of depends on the professor at that point. We do have about a minute left, at least for the tutorial. I think I've given you definitely enough to look at for the weekend. However, I would say keep in mind, as much as I did not stay organized in this tutorial, please remember to be organized, right? Your grids, start calling them floors if that's the way you want to talk about them, curvilinear walls versus rectilinear walls, pipes. I mean, you don't necessarily have to pipe these either. You can make them I-beams, you can make them oh, don't make them triangles, that's kind of weird. At least be architectural, and I'll say that in quotations, right? So if some of you guys are already learning about I-beams in Tech 1 and Tech 2, use some I-beams, right? Use some hollow beams, right? Use, what's his name? Mies van der Rohe used to use cross beams, right? Especially at Barcelona Pavilion, quite famous for those beams. So what I'm trying to say is do the work here, that way you don't have to do it later. However, keep in mind, we do need 3 iterations, so of course, that's why I'm giving you the weekend. And it could probably, especially for this exercise, we could do it all in one file, so it shouldn't be too bad. Any questions off the bat, sort of just coming to mind? I see some of you guys flying through it, getting used to it. Definitely appreciate that. Definitely notice you guys following along. But is there any questions you wanted to get in the video?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Build all of this, you want to go back and layer it. What's the quickest way to layer it?
Wonderful. Good way. So there's not really a quick way. I kind of have to honestly click on each selection, which is why I should have been organized in the first place. But let's say I want to turn those all into floors. I'll select everything, right click on that layer. Let's say this was floors. Right click and change object layer. Right, and you'll see it, of course, turn immediately blue. Right. And once I actually get those, I can start quote unquote removing them. Does that make sense? And that'll make my selection process a little easier too. Right. Does that make sense, Robert?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Right, so I can even take these pieces, you know, turn that, say, into a wall layer. Right, so change object layer. And, you know, it's kind of up to you. You either do it at the beginning or at the end. Sometimes I like doing it at the end because I come up with stuff I don't really know what I'm doing yet. And, you know, I'll delete it later, or, you know. Design is about making decisions. Am I right?
One more question.
Yes.
Be as abstract as we want.
Within reason, right? Don't make an octopus or something, you know, like, that's why I said in quotations, be architectural, right? You know, the pipe grid system is architectural. It's a basic shape, but I could easily choose an I-beam. I could make it square. You know, my columns I made square, but they could easily be circular. You know, you can even mix and match like I've done here. But don't get too crazy like our previous assignment. Like, some of you guys were making stuff that was like, okay, now go ahead and try and make that, right? You know, like, it was almost impossible for even the computer to understand what you were doing. So again, I like that you're pushing the program and seeing what it's capable of. But at least for this assignment, let's keep it architectural, architectonic to be specific. Helpful, Robert?
That is. Thank you much.
Very sweet. I'll go ahead and end it here. and call it a day.